Hello.
Hi, how are you?
I am good. How are you? How's your week been?
It has been fairly productive.
Nice.
My baby just learned to roll over, so there's a lot of like alarming sort of running after that. But when she's quiet in the studio, then work gets done, so that's nice.
That is very sweet. Congratulations to her. Well done.
Yeah, she won't stop now.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this week I have chosen to look at a painting from 19th century Sweden. And it is a portrait of Pierre Louis Alexandre by the Swedish artist Karin Bergöö Larsson. And it was painted around 1879. But before I say more, would you like to describe it?
Yeah. So I don't know how big it is, but it's a beautiful three-quarter length portrait. I mean, he's seated, but you can
Hmm.
see three-quarters of him, so I'm going to go with
Yes.
three-quarter length. Of a seated black male. He's got one leg up and his arms around that one leg. He's sort of looking wistfully into the distance, but he's got kind of I don't know, something of a little bit of a like an interesting kind of intellectual look in his eye, like he's thinking about something.
Mm.
Um, there's this amazing light blue background that contrasts with the tones in his skin and the yellow of a sash around his waist. And he's got like red and white striped. They look like shorts, but I don't think you'd call them shorts in the 1870s or whatever those were called, like breeches or something.
Yeah.
Um, which look that's like candy stripe, kind of like beautiful detail in that. Yeah, it's a beautiful, beautiful painting. Like his hands are kind of like knotted together around his knee. It just looks very natural and very comfortable, as if someone's just been captured in a moment.
Yeah. Great description. Thank you. So yes, this was, as I said, this painting was made in around 1879. And the artist is Karin Bergöö Larsson, who was not, as I'll talk about later, was not primarily known for her painting, but rather as a textile designer and an interior decorator.
Oh, that
Um,
makes so much sense because I looked her up to find this picture and I just saw like interiors. I was really confused.
Yes, exactly. So she made this painting when she was a student at the Royal Swedish Academy of Arts as one of the few female students there. Um, and this is one of around 40 surviving works by Swedish artists that represent Pierre, this model. Um, and this is probably the best known of them because arguably it is the most kind of individual, it captures him as an individual.
Mm,
Whereas, as we'll discuss, a lot of the others were a lot more stereotypical and kind of orientalizing and didn't really cast Pierre as an individual. Um,
mm. More
so
like a character or something.
yeah, like a character or a type and the kind of other to a European gaze. Um, and so today I thought there's kind of two biographies. It's like Pierre Louis Alexandre and Karin Bergö Larsen. And I thought I'd
Mm-hmm.
start with Pierre Louis Alexandre because it feels most like about this painting.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and the sources are the caption to the painting in the National Gallery in Washington, which is where this painting now is. It was acquired last year from a private collection. Um, then the obviously the Wikipedia pages for Karin Berger Larsen and her husband, Carl Larsen, who is also a painter. Um, the family home of the Larsens, which is a website, which is a museum and has a website which has useful information about them on. And then an article by Monica Miller called Figuring Blackness in a Place Without Race, Sweden, recently, which was published in 2017. This is a really useful article
Mm,
about representations of Black people in Swedish art history more generally, and there's a lot on this painting in particular. And then finally a book by Mats Werner, who is a Swedish art historian, and it's a book dedicated to Pierre Louis Alexandre. And the English edition was published this year. And it's really a fascinating book because this was Mats Werner was the owner of this painting before
Oh,
it was acquired last year by the National Gallery in Washington. And just quickly, the kind of provenance of it is really interesting because Matt's father was a lawyer for Karin's brother. And apparently, Per Bergöö, the brother, was not one of the most savvy businessmen. It's kind of apparently so, and so he paid Matt's father at one point with this painting, which had been handed down by his parents. So it had been in the family for decades.
right.
So Mats Werner was the person who kind of, I guess, grew up looking at this painting, and then it was the mystery around who is this man, and then discovered these a huge number of these works around, mainly around Sweden from this period. Um, so yeah. So it's pretty interesting, like to start with Pierre's life. It's pretty interesting because there is quite a lot of information. Obviously, we have, it's often very, very hard unless people were wealthy and white, pretty much, they weren't going to be recorded in history, like
Mm.
in the archives, or and often, as I suppose, like we'll talk about it later, but the idea of, the representations you can see, obviously we see Black people represented in art over art history in all different periods. It's quite unusual to have a painting like this that's so much about the individual, that feels like you really get a sense of a person's character.
Yeah, it reminds me of the Rubens multiple head studies.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's not that it's like, oh, therefore the artist was like never problematic and they were like,
Mm.
at all. It's just more about an artistic archive that allows you to really recover an individual, or to feel that there was a real presence there.
Sometimes there's paintings that connect with the person. I feel like they connect with the person. It doesn't make the artist unproblematic or like mean that they were like really woke. It just
Yeah,
means that
yeah.
that particular work about it, it seems like it connected with like that art, that model's personality, and that there's
Yeah.
something very like familial about it. And you
Yeah.
could say that about like some of Velasquez's court paintings and things like that.
Also, yeah, those are really good examples as well. And yeah, we have to, I guess, also be careful about like reading into yeah, like you say, the artists, seeing them as what they were intending to do might be very different to how we then interpret it.
But
So
somehow in our like contemporary visual language, it
exactly.
reads in a positive light, whether it was intended that way at the time or not.
Yes, exactly. And what I love about this is we do know quite a bit about Pierre's life. I mean, first of all, like the fact that he has a name and that we know who he was is one thing, because so many paintings are just are of anonymous
Mm.
black sitters, and that's another kind of obstacle in writing the history of this. But Pierre was born in French Guiana around 1844 to 80, or 1845. Slavery was abolished there technically, I think for the second time. I'm not sure how that works, but around when he was around 3 to 4 years old. So he was born into slavery there. When he was around 20 years old, he managed to get on a ship transporting sugar via Brazil and possibly New York. And then he made the 2 to 3 month journey to Stockholm, Sweden, where he
Mm.
arrived in 1863.
With
So that,
with the slavery being abolished twice, I don't know, it might be wrong, but I feel like Napoleon tried to bring it back at one point. That
yes,
was
so
one of his things was to bring back slavery.
yeah, that's it. That's right. You're right.
So that might be why it was done twice.
Yes, and there in Monica Miller's article, she says he may have been a stowaway, either as a fugitive slave or as a recently freed man escaping French colonization. Uh,
Right.
so yeah, I mean, it's to think of that life of being born in French Guiana in that context and ending up in Sweden, even on a literal level of the climate, is like
Yeah.
huge contrast. Um, and so once he arrived in Stockholm, Alexander Pierre found work as a dock laborer. And he worked in the docks for most of his life in Sweden. He stayed in
Mm.
Stockholm. Um, but in 1878, he appears on the payroll of the Academy of Fine Arts as an artist's model, where he seems to have worked when the docks were frozen over in winter.
Mm.
So, in the records from the Academy, we see him working as a model from 1878 to 1882, which is when Karin Bergöö Larsson was there, and when this painting was made, and then again in 1903. And Monica Miller writes about Pierre's status, quote, as an oxymoronic stranger at home in Stockholm. So, on the one hand, he was relatively anonymous. There aren't that many records of his actual life. Um, and like I say, he was a dock worker, and living in quite a poor part of the city.
Mm.
The evidence we do have is that he was married twice, and he had two children with his first wife. Either they were his first wife's children from a previous marriage or their children. And he lived at several addresses over the years in the city. And then in 1905, so that's only 2 years after his last modeling stint, he was in his early 60s and he died of tuberculosis.
Wow.
Um, So I mean, even just knowing those little bits um of life information, like seeing this painting, it makes him feel so much more alive, I
Yeah.
think.
It's quite
Uh,
a life as well, like to
mm,
escape and then you're
yeah,
working manual job, you have two marriages, you're modeling in an art college. Like it's a
I
lot of
know.
different, yeah, a lot of
Yeah.
different versions of yourself, I guess.
Yeah, and also like he would have been fairly apparently like black people in Sweden during this period would have been a lot less um well, there were a lot less present. There were far fewer black people than, say, in Britain or France during this period. So, like, we do have paintings, say, from Manet of black women working in Paris, and this, like, it kind of wasn't the same in Sweden. So he probably also would have been cast, even though he lived there most of his life, he would have been a bit of an outsider
Yeah.
visibly, even among dock workers. So, but then kind of on the other hand, so you have this relative anonymity contrast with being quite visible um, at the docks. He also is highly recorded in the visual culture of the city because of his modeling.
Mm.
Um, and there are actually two photographs of him, which I find even more exciting just because having a photograph, again, it feels really unusual to have a photograph of a working class person
Yeah.
from this period who you then also see represented in these amazing oil paintings. And as part of like the city's artistic elite, and that range of works. So and the photographs show him posing in front of the art students.
Well.
So it's really fascinating. You actually one of them is him dressed up in a an exoticized costume. And
Mm.
then the other one is really odd because can see the white male painters all with their canvases. And then behind, like through, you can see Pierre actually sat uh, in the background. So yeah, that really brings him to life as well. Um, so in many of the paintings of Pierre, as I say, he was more a kind of racialized type. Um, and in a lot of them, he's dressed as what Miller says, a typical Renaissance Moor. Um,
Right.
and with an earring, a turban, golden sword, patterned fabrics, and an emphasis on his nobility and his physique. So often he's um, a topless or yeah, dressed in very exoticizing clothing. And
Yeah,
it's
looking at some of the other versions
yeah,
now.
exactly.
Yeah, it's very like harking back to sort of Italian Renaissance style with like
Yes.
swords and pantaloons and things
Yeah,
like
it's like
that.
the Rembrandt dressing up box kind of thing.
Yeah, it's a bit
And
of everything.
it's also funny because he's from French Guiana. Like
Mm.
this is casting him as the in the Oriental fantasy of the
Yeah,
time.
he's like in front of like a Persian rug with like a turban and a long sword and very like yeah, jarring with his actual life and experience.
Yeah, I mean this is a man working in the docks
Mm.
and yeah. Um
One of him in a
so
fez.
yeah, yeah. And this would have been like his inclusion as a model in the academy would have been more like an exercise for the artists to draw or paint a black man and
Yeah.
to create this kind of fantasy of foreignness and exoticism. Um,
Mm.
and so Miller
They're
says,
not great paintings either, are they? They're very much like student works when I'm looking at
yes,
them. And
yeah.
we sound snobby, but I'm like, not the best.
No, and it's because he doesn't really seem to be given space to like be a person in it.
Yeah, they're not
What happened?
portraits.
No,
They
they're
are
not at all.
he's a character in these kind of themed paintings
Yeah.
that don't really they're not really hitting the theme and they're not really like portraying him like that accurately. His face looks different in several of them. It's
Yeah.
very varied.
Yes, you don't actually like when you see the photos as well, you can see, yeah, like you've not got his face at all.
Mm,
Um, Unfortunately for them, we have photos so we can see.
yeah,
You didn't do a good job, guys. And it's really like you have to, with those particular paintings, I think that's what's so powerful about having this archival evidence, because
yeah,
even with those, you can say, well, I have the knowledge that he was married and he worked in the docks and this is where he came from. So it goes some way to humanize him in those paintings, I think.
yeah,
Um, but I thought what Miller says is quite interesting. She says it's, quote, a depiction of a Swedish artist's, this is referring to these paintings that you just mentioned, Swedish artists' participation in the traditions of 19th century European aesthetics that were fueled by colonialism and imperialism. And she makes the point that this wasn't necessarily that Sweden was partaking as actively in the actual structures of the colonialism of colonial expansion and
mm,
rule, although I'm sure they were as well. This is where my knowledge on this fails me. But it's also the aesthetics of it, and they're
yeah.
kind of
Because
it's one of
colonialism sparked a visual movement,
yeah,
a very
uh,
problematic work.
yes, yeah, exactly. So I thought that was useful to context. It has you have to contextualize it within that tradition as well.
Yeah,
But
it's these
then
sort of
that's what,
anglicized, Europeanized images of
yeah,
the countries in the empire, I guess.
yes, and it's like a fetish, really.
Yeah,
That's what
it's
the
the
Oriental,
exoticism,
yeah,
Orientalism.
yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. But that's what makes this portrait by Bergöö Larsson so significant, I think. As we've said, he is able to be much more an individual in it. Um, and so in some of these ways, Miller mentions that there are some orientalizing elements. So the
mm,
sash around his waist could potentially be kind of part of the same costume or
Yeah.
dressing up box almost. But she points out that this is transformed into the uniform of a sailor or a dock worker because it's seen alongside, as you described, the red striped trousers and also his rolled up shirt sleeves. So there's more room for him to look more contemporary, I guess.
Mm,
And he's also close to the picture plane. He feels physically present. And it is that look, I think, of that gaze upwards that gives him a kind of quiet strength.
yeah.
And I think what's amazing is I'm looking at it now is zooming in on the National Gallery website. It's amazing brushwork that's goes into this painting. You can
Yeah, it's
really
got
zoom
lots of little
in.
tiny marks all over the face, but it looks really smooth when you zoom out.
Exactly. It's actually really surprised me when I zoomed in just how alive that the texture of that surface feels. And I'm zooming in to say his beard, and there's these purple marks and flicks as well. And um his skin color definitely, it has lots of kind of purples, greens, and the background even with the blue, it's still got different shades within it. So
Mm,
it's a really lively portrait in lots of ways, despite him also having this quite serene look on his face.
yeah.
Um, yeah, and I don't know, he's very, but then looking at it, I also don't want to kind of over egg, like, oh, he looks so like human with the like, like clearly he's an artist's model here.
Yeah, and we don't know how Karin viewed Pierre.
Yeah.
So
Like,
you can't say it's like, oh, it's an amazing like person. She really saw him and it's so personal and it's full of his character and no idea what she's trying to imbue on Pierre or whether she just,
mm,
didn't really engage with the more oriental aesthetic. I don't, it could just be a million reasons why this image is the way it is.
yeah, I mean, he could just be, this could be what he dressed up in for that sitting period.
Yeah,
And that's, um, it's also, again, the fact that we think about, even regardless of what she was trying to do, it's also how was he received as an image, and given that he was part of loads of different images of him at this time where there was a kind of fascination with this the foreignness supposedly that he represented. Um yeah, I think definitely have to be careful not to over um I guess not to praise Bergöö Larsson herself. Um
yeah. It's sort of reminding me of the Reynolds, the portrait of Omai,
mhm.
and he's all dressed up. I think he's Polynesian, and he's dressed up in like a turban and like
Yes.
he's got like loads of fabric all over him, but he's got his traditional tattoos on his hands.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure about. I don't think there's any on the face, but they're on the hands, and it's very like it's kind of lauded as this like really beautiful, portrait of Omai, and then but it's like so sort of riddled with what's going on at the time and how people are viewed and like how people are exoticized and yeah, it's
Yeah.
sort of reminding me of that was
Yeah.
going on in the UK at the same, rough
Yeah,
time period.
for sure. I think what's so valuable about it now is that it simply to have an image, I think also does go because, we're in such a visual, we place so much privilege on the visual that
Mm,
having even an image that is very problematic, I still think I'm of the opinion that it's still so valuable as a record, as a contribution of a record that people um, of all different backgrounds and ethnicities existed. Because
definitely. I'm
it,
all for show the problematic things, but
oh,
label them
totally.
label
Yeah.
them correctly and in like
Yeah.
intelligently and deal with what's problematic about them right off the front and say it. don't
Yeah,
don't
and
romanticize problematic images just because they depict something that we're really hopeful and desperate to see in art.
yeah, there's the hopefulness, isn't there? That's like it can
I think
blur.
that is what it is. It's
things.
it is
Yeah,
that of
yeah,
someone over there was really, really not a racist
yeah,
in
yeah,
the 1800s, and you're like, mm,
yeah,
or was it just, the circumstance and the model and the pose and
yeah.
what was going on in the studio that day, or
Yeah, you have to go into the
those.
historical moment. Absolutely. Like always is the thing, I think, and try and put your own like hopefulness on hold while you
Mm.
go into these. I do think also the fact that so I did for a previous job I wrote about this painting a few years ago and I wrote like oh maybe the fact that Karin Bergöö Larsson was a model for her own husband was she kind of had an understanding with him of what it's like to be on the other side of the canvas and to model. I was like, not right, like researching again for this. I was like, no, I actually got that wrong. First of all, this was painted around 1879, and Karin Bergie Larsen met Carl in 1883, I think. So, okay, that was first of all, no. And also, like, who is to say that that is such a like that would be, I think, a romanticization of it.
That's classic hopefulness, that
Yeah,
is.
total hopefulness. So I think just going, this is doing lots of different things, this painting, and
Mm.
it's really amazing. And I think but not to overhype that element was yeah, so I was like, oh Esme, what are you doing? Yeah, hopeful. Um, but to kind of that kind of is a nice segue into Bergie Larson and her life, and it is also so fascinating to think about what was her life like and what was Pierre Louis Alexandre's life like.
Mm.
They overlapped briefly, in the academy, and then clearly veered, unsurprisingly. Um,
Mm.
but she was so, like I said, she was a painter and a designer who she got married to Carl Larsson, who was a prominent Swedish painter, and she was the main model actually for his paintings. She was born in 1859 and grew up in Hallsberg, which is about a 2.5 hours drive west of Stockholm. That's how I it's a municipality, but I looked it up and I was looking up the places in Sweden and I did not realize how big Sweden was.
Oh, it's massive.
It's so massive. It's apparently the fifth biggest country in Europe. I had to look this up because I was like, Google, how big is Sweden? Massive. I've I've been to Sweden, but only to like I went camping there. So we went across to Denmark from Denmark and we just drove
Mm.
around like the tiny bit and I had absolutely no idea it was so big. So um 2.5 hours actually from Stockholm, not that
Yeah, not
not
that
that
far from
far,
Stockholm,
no.
considering how far you can get from there.
Yeah, exactly. So she was the daughter of a successful businessman, and she went to study art at the Arts and Crafts School in Stockholm when she was quite young, and then she went to the Art Academy from 1877 to 1882
Mm.
when she made this painting. And I do think she's a pretty amazing painter.
Yeah,
Looking at this, like just technically, it's very beautiful and accomplished. Um, and the use of color as well, I think, is amazing. But she didn't actually keep painting for very long, which is sad, I think. She moved to, after art school, she moved to the Scandinavian artists colony outside of Paris in a small village called Grèze. And she fell in love with Carl Larsson there. They got married soon after and had their first daughter in 1884. Um, and apparently, Bergö Larsson, she wrote a letter to Carl after their engagement saying that she was grateful to be engaged to him because it would end her obligation to paint.
weird.
So I'm like, another hopeful, like, it's a female artist. And then she's like, oh, thank God I'm getting married. I don't need to paint anymore. Like, no, no, Karen. So, so they moved back to Stockholm in 1885, and then to Gothenburg, where Carl worked as an art teacher, and she was dedicating herself to their growing family and home. And they had
Mm.
8 children overall.
Wow.
So she was having babies. And then in 1888, they moved to a cottage which Carl's dad gave to them in a small village. The cottage is called Lilla Hitchnas. I mean, this is Swedish, that's definitely wrong. Pronunciation again. And this is the really fascinating thing is that they turned it into this cottage into an artistic residence, basically. It kind of reminds me a bit of Charleston, with the
Mm.
Bloomsbury Group. Is that in Sussex, I think?
I can't remember where it is, but I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, it's like the kind of British, and actually it was around the same time. It's like I guess, overlapping with arts and crafts movement in Britain. And Carl and Karen were definitely influenced by that, going on around like in the late 19th century. So it was a family home and a site of artistic innovation. And I think like maybe you've looked up like Carl's paintings as well. To me, they look a bit twee. Um,
See.
but they apparently were like they're very like idealized like mother and child illustrations. Yeah, you're grimacing.
Oh, they look like sort of children's picture books.
Yeah.
Yeah, twee's the right word.
Kind of like Enid Blyton a bit.
Yeah, I think there is some sort of, I mean, I'm massively generalizing, but there's definitely some sort of Nordic
Oh yeah.
leaning towards like, the raising of children and the outdoors and all of that, like are going on around that time.
It's
But I don't know if
giving
that's
Aryan, to be honest.
it
Like
is,
I'm
yeah.
not
But then I think some of that is sometimes that is so inadvertent and
I
sometimes
know
it's so
it
purposeful
is.
and it's really hard to root out the difference.
I think that's like I think that's from what I've read, that's my projection from a like knowing what comes later.
Yeah.
Um in Europe, because apparently at the time this was very innovative in terms of like images of domestic space where adults and children seem to be equals and like very harmonious. There are also like the combination of things. So like you say, it's like Swedish folk design, but then the influence of arts and crafts in Britain. So like I guess William Morris, that kind of style, and then also Japanese, like the craze for Japanese art and design
Mm,
in Western Europe at the time. Um, and I guess I'm saying this just because it's like quite interesting how, like, when we look at this painting of Pierre Louis Alexandre, the like it's so different to what Bergöö Larsson is really known for because she's actually known for like interior decoration, textiles, furniture design. She's known for abstract and stylized tapestry and playful clothes that she designed for her and her children. Um, and apparently, like the House Museum's website writes that like the couple were really an artistic partnership. So
mm,
Karin Bergøe Larsson created the home that Carl Larsson then depicted, and together they created the motifs that have come to characterize the picture of Sweden that is cherished the world over. Which I'm like, okay, sure, that's
yeah,
fine. I guess like then I just looked and like actually what that means is IKEA is very influenced by Karen Bergøe Larsen.
cherished. You know how
Yes,
cherished
the
that flat
picture
pack
of Sweden that
furniture.
is cherished the world over in flat packs. No offense,
Mass
Sweden, like this
production.
is sure sorry. And like it's interesting. There was a 1997 exhibition in the V&A,
Mm.
which was about Carl and Karen, creators of Swedish style.
Oh,
Um, so really this is like I suppose the best equivalent in the UK would be like Vanessa Bell
yeah.
and Duncan, is it who's it,
Grant,
Duncan
I think.
Grant? Yeah, and there is something about going to a house that was in itself the place of creativity and artistic collaboration and like
Yeah,
furniture, and it's amazing. Like Kettle's Yard as well, I guess, is
yeah,
a
and St. Ives.
St. Ives. So yeah, but and then I suppose it's interesting to think about like Max Werner and his father's house and his family house having the painting of Pierre Louis Alexandre, and that also being part of a domestic
Hmm.
setting for years and years, and just like
Well, it's quite interesting
yeah.
to me the fact that this portrait was bought by the National Gallery of Art in Washington, and the fact
Mhm.
that it is just kind of a standalone work in her
Yeah.
creative output. And it sort of reminding me, you know, how the new National Portrait Gallery hang is very much based on the sitters and not the artist.
Yes.
So
I
it can
actually
be
went
like,
yesterday.
right. I
Yeah.
haven't been still. It's
Yeah,
not in
it's
London
been
anymore.
I was way too late. Like I should have been there way earlier. I
Same.
mean, I live in London, so it's like, come on.
But yeah, it's reminding me of that because it's not really so much. I guess it kind of is about Karen, but it's not really about her out. Like, it doesn't exemplify her in any
No,
way.
no.
Um, it's more sort of cherished because of the kind of image it is in a time where it's rare to get those kinds of images, in a place where it's rare to get those kind of images.
Yeah.
It's interesting when work is kind of, particularly because he's not famous as well. It's like when
Yeah.
the work is so focused on the sitter and it's about the sitter, but the sitter
Mm.
isn't a famous person, as something kind of and again, you know, it can be kind of hopeful to be like, well, there's something kind of special about that. That's not really about Karen and it's not really about his fame. It's actually just of
Yeah.
him, and that's why people cherish it. But
Mm.
again, we might be cherishing it because we're projecting onto it. But it's an
Yeah.
interesting back and forth.
Yeah, and also the fact that it's ended up in America when it's also really to do with like with Sweden and Stockholm and that city and that historical moment. And I imagine like in a collection like the Met, not the Met, sorry, in the National Gallery in Washington, and kind of same with the Met, like it would have a different context, I think, as
Well, I
a
think it's
picture
good
of a
that it's
black
in
man.
America. It's telling another story. It's telling an
Yes,
alternative story,
true,
which
true.
is equally as, you know, complex and problematic, but
Mm.
it's a different narrative. And I think like all
Yeah.
the narratives should try and be spread and displayed and explained.
Yeah, and the good thing is that actually there are so many still in Sweden of Pierre Louis Alexandre, and like his history is certainly being studied there more as well.
That's mad, isn't it? Like someone who's like, you know, not famous hasn't done other than escaping French Guiana, which is, you know,
Yeah.
brilliant, has achieved like something like, you know, he didn't go there and, you know, cure a disease or something, but yet his whole story is being told, and I think that's an incredible legacy.
Yeah, yeah. And the kind of, I think also the fact that, when I was thinking about, okay, so how much do I want to talk about Karin Bergöö Larsson? Because in a way, you're off down a whole other rabbit hole when you're talking about her interior design. Like you say, this feels like quite a standalone painting.
Mm,
And I think that's what I should also warn us against, like bringing Karin and Pierre together as individuals
mm.
in a maybe a bit of a romanticized, hopeful way, which I was guilty of for sure.
Well, yeah, and in many ways, it doesn't exemplify either of them.
No, true, true. And you kind of have to look beyond the painting and into the archives or other paintings
Yeah.
or artworks.